name is Kim Prallberg, and I will be your narrator today for the 2012 International Building Code Update. People who finish this class will be able to understand some of the major differences in the 2009 to the 2012 edition. Given our short time frame, we aren't going to have time to have everything, but we're going to try and give you some of the major code changes. Something that's in the 2012 International Building Code that will be helpful to help you identify where the changes are is if you have a solid line in the margin, that means that there's been a technical change from the requirements between the 2009 and 2012 edition. If you see an arrow in the margin, that means either a section, a paragraph, an item in a list, an exception, or a table has been deleted. You won't see this arrow if it's just a sentence of a section. Something that's new in the 2012, if a section has been relocated, you'll see an asterisk in the margin rather than an arrow for deletion. And when that section has been moved to someplace, you'll see a double asterisk, so you'll realize that that provision has been moved from someplace else. An administrative change to the building code has been that all the definitions that were split up through the chapter have been moved back to Chapter 2. They are still listed in their previous locations, but just the terms. They're always sent back to Chapter 2 where all the definitions are officially going to be located. In the associated chapters, they're going to try and give you a little bit of a hint that those words are defined by italicizing the letters. Now, you do have several code changes, 2 definitions that are in your handout, but we're going to discuss those as they're relevant to the chapters and the revisions that they were made for. Okay, basically there was an overall approach change in Chapter 3 for use in occupancy classification, and basically they took all the sections and where they had it split up, like A's have A1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, don't have that under one section, it'll all be their own section numbers, including sections that said that something was not within that occupancy, like when daycare did not have to be included in Group A. So most of the provisions in these sections are not new, but a result of the new section numbers by the reorganization. What is new that added to Group A2 is a casino or gaming floor will now be considered a Group A2. They also specifically try to address kitchens. If a kitchen has a restaurant associated with it, it would be an A2. If a kitchen does not have a restaurant associated with it, it's a commercial kitchen and it would be considered an F1 moderate hazard. Now, there was a lot of work done based on 24-hour care facilities. Last year that was handled by a special group from the CTC committee that took looked at a lot of these provisions. Some of the clarifications that they specifically went after as far as the definitions was to establish 3 levels of care: medical care, custodial care, which is basically supervised living arrangement, personal care, which made assistance just with everyday needs. They also defined incapable of self-preservation, so a lot of the provisions are split between when people are capable of self-evacuating even at a slow rate versus not capable of self-evacuating. They took a look at ambulatory care facilities, which was somewhere in between your standard doctor's office and a hospital, typically classified as a use group B, but a lot of these new dialysis centers, outpatient surgeries, oral surgery centers, where you could have persons not capable of self-preservation, then that's an ambulatory care facility. We'll go into that a little bit more when we cover the provisions in section 422. Another change here is care suites. The provisions for care suites, because they just said suites, even though they were located under hospitals, would sometimes be broadly applied to all types of suites that might show up in the hospital. But really these provisions were mainly for patient sleeping rooms and patient care rooms. So they tried to change the definition to make that very clear that these were only for these particular types of suites. They also defined several of the uses that they wanted to show up under some of the institutional facilities. Some of those include detoxification facilities, foster homes, group homes, hospital and psychiatric hospitals, and nursing homes. Now for the I1 and R4 provisions, this is custodial care for persons who reside at that facility. And even though it's custodial care, supervised living arrangements, these people have to be capable of self-preservation. Under both the I1 and the I4, because basically an R4 is a smaller I1, The 8 provisions listed, or examples, are the same. Those are alcohol and drug centers, assisted living, congregate care, convalescence, group homes, halfway houses, residential board and care, and social rehab. The main difference between the two is that the I-1 is for facilities more than 16 persons, and R4 is between 5 and 16. Now the R4 use group was developed as part of our coordination with the Fair Housing Act so that people could be in residential environments as mandated by many state laws and the Fair Housing Act and not cause a problem with the building code as far as zoning, fire, etc. Section 402. Okay, moving to Chapter 4 on covered mall buildings. There was a lot of revisions for covered mall buildings, but there was many questions associated with how that was applied to open mall buildings. So basically they've reorganized all of 402 to put in open mall provisions in almost all the sections. They also added something new that talks about a perimeter line. So although, a lot of open malls are collective structures with walkways or even streets in between, you draw a perimeter line around the entire facility, so it's handled as one structure and looking at the open malls and covered mall provisions. And it's essential that you get this correct for the application of 402. Next section that we're going to look at here is means of egress, chapters 10 and 11. Back up in the front of chapter 10, section 1001.4 basically is a reference to the fire code for fire and safety evacuation plans. The idea was that they wanted to make sure that when the building was being designed and built, that these fire and safety evacuation plans were being considered so that they could be ready before the building was finalized. And also these plans have to be updated annually or as required, so if somebody's doing an alteration to a building, you might be looking at reevaluating the fire and safety evacuation plan, so having this reference in chapter 10 will help people remember that. Now, section 1004.1.2 and the table, they wanted to make sure that they revised the reference to the table to clarify that this is really the function of the space that determines the occupant load, not the use or occupancy of the building. This has been the policy that we've always had, but they tried to really make that come home so that somebody wasn't using a business use occupancy 100 square foot per person if they were talking about their conference room. Something was added to the tables based on a study of information that was brought forth are museum and exhibit galleries. These are an A use, but the table and chair configurations just didn't really work for them. So based on designs and occupant load counts that were taken for big shows and different art galleries, etc., the occupant load is now determined at 30 square foot per occupant in display areas. Now, changes for what is now the new sections 1005.1 through 1005.6. Basically, the exit width and capacity were in sections 1004.4, 1004.5, 1005.1. They were reorganized, put together in a more cohesive and logical manner. So 1005.2 is now width based on the components. Point 3 is the capacity based on the occupant load, and that's subdivided into stairways and other elements like corridors, doors, and ramps. Point 4 is continuity. Point 5 is distribution of capacity, and point 6 is coverage. I do want to point out that under stairways and others, the reduced exit width factor that was in the 2006, removed in the 2009, has been reestablished for sprinklered buildings, provided they also have an emergency voice alarm communication system. So hopefully that'll help people get that good balance for those type of provisions. Chapter 2, there is a special CTC work group that was looking at the open stairways, and they moved, before these sections moved to Chapter 2, they did a lot of work on the new definitions. They added 4 new ones: exit access ramp, exit access stairway, interior exit ramp, and interior exit stairway. They revised exit access doorway, exit, and corridors. Basically, they were trying to make coordination because of a means of egress committee special request to the CTC committee about when you allowed open stairways between floors, not level change, but between floors as part of your means of egress system. Were those exit stairways or were those exit access stairways? So the decision was that if you had an enclosed fire resistance rated protection, that was an exit stairway. If you wanted to have it open, that would be an exit access stairway, and that would affect your number of exits and your travel distance. But then that should be permitted in limited circumstances. So I'll explain to you some of the stuff that they did. First, they went to new scoping provisions at the beginning of section 1009 and basically said that stairway provisions, height and risers, handrails, guards, everything, were applicable to all stairways, even convenience stairways, because those were safety issues. Then they said that if you had an interior exit stairway, those stairways had to be protected as vertical exit enclosures in accordance with 1022. However, if you wanted to allow them to be open, exit access stairways were going to start in section 1009.3, and they started out requiring protection unless you could fit into one of the exceptions. And those protection levels were following the provisions that you find in the new 712 and 713 that we talked about for protection of shafts. So if a stairway is an exit access stairway, the difference mainly is that your travel distance doesn't stop at the top of the stairway. It goes down the stairway and to the door on the exit on the outside. The exception, of course, being for that is open parking garages and outdoor stadiums and arenas. Under 1010.2, they put in the same provisions for ramps that they did for stairways. So if you have a ramp that goes between floor levels, like this example at the Science and Industry Museum in Chicago, it's an exit access ramp and it's permitted to be open under limited circumstances. Section 1011.2 added requirements for low-level exit signages in hotels on the floors where you have sleeping rooms. And basically it either has to be on the door, 10 inches up from the floor, so it doesn't interfere with somebody's foot plates if they're trying to get into the stairway if they're using a wheelchair, or it needs to be next to the door, it needs to be within 4 inches of the frame. It has to be mounted flush, but it still has to be internally or externally illuminated with a 90-minute battery power. So what you have to be careful of is if you do a sign on the door, you do not want to jeopardize the fire safety rating of your exit stairway door.